Hello, everybody. Welcome to TPI, the Total Podcast Idiots Show, where we cover anything and everything related to Hardwood, yours and ours favorite online college basketball simulator. I'm one of your hosts, Robert, and there's my co-host Andrew over there. Andrew, how you feeling today?
Feeling good. Our first video, we got some great feedback, some great responses from the community, and I just want to thank the community for all that love and support. All the viewers, especially the admin Steve, the admin of Hardwood, for publicizing our video, and that's awesome. We got some great feedback, some great ideas from a lot of the listeners and viewers, and we even got some potential guests coming that we're both really excited about. Some big names, some I would call them celebrities in Hardwood, really.
I think one of the coolest things about that is that each person will probably have a pretty unique story for their program and sort of how they built it. And it's going to be really cool to get all kinds of different perspectives on the game. And I think we'll all just benefit from that.
Yeah, so this is our second kind of episode. It's maybe more like a side hustle, uh, a sidebar type of episode. It's more for beginners, but just make sure to please like, comment, subscribe to our channel, like the video, comment on the video. The usual YouTube things. Um,
We're also going to try and get this, see if we can't get this up on alternate sources. So like Apple Podcasts, maybe sort of venture into the different ways that we can get the show out there, make it more accessible to everyone. That was one of the
yeah,
comments that we got from you guys, and we had never really considered. So
right. Yeah, we just don't know how to do that yet, but we'll
yeah,
figure it
yeah.
out. So yeah, this is going to be a shorter, hopefully, episode where we dive into a concept. The weekend ones that we did last time, that's going to be a longer look at the entire Hardwood universe. So yeah, that means we're going to try to bring you 2 episodes a week. That looked weird with my background.
That's the keyword. Try. All right, we're busy individuals, but we're going to do our best for you guys.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Rob, what's today's topic going to be?
So today's topic is going to be an overall general look at taking over a new team, sort of what you want to look for, like what's your personal connection to a team, how do you want to grow a team. Once you have a team and you've started to identify some of your prospects, how do you find some really good prospects, some guys that'll fit your program versus some guys that won't, or guys that may not be the best overall prospects? Because as we know, every prospect is not made equally, and there's a there's a couple of different keys that we've identified that we think might aid some people in looking for some good talent. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so these videos are, I'd say, more meant for beginners, right? The longer ones are probably more for the fanatics like us. And but that said, there's going to be real value, I think, in these videos. We're going to try to hit a shallow level of analysis for the beginners, and then go in a little bit deeper, and then try to dig really deep in these concepts. So I think anybody of any skill level, any experience can take value from this.
100%
Yeah.
agree. Yeah.
So yeah, the first step when signing up, when entering Hardwood, is signing up for a new team. So what are some factors in taking over a new team? Just the superficial ones to start off with.
So obviously, like if you're an alumni of one of the colleges, and maybe you were a fan of the basketball team when you were there, that's a super big personal connection to a university kind of thing. Or maybe you just have some personal affinity for a team. A lot of people might have gone to a smaller college, D2, D3 or something, but they grew up cheering for like a D1 team, like UCLA or Kentucky or Duke or any whatever situation that might be. So maybe these are some sort of personal connections, or maybe even you just like the team name. There's some really cool like team names out there.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, some that pop to mind are like the Sonoma State Seawolves. That's a pretty cool name. Um, and so just how do we find our teams? Why do we like those teams? What's our connection to them, and how do we actually get super interested in that team kind of thing? So maybe you want to speak a little bit about like what particular reasons attracted you to your squads.
Yeah, well, when I looked over my when I first entered, it was early in the season, early in the 2013 season, but a few games had already been played. Um, so I kind of skimmed D3 first off. I mean, that's where the majority of available teams are first, but also I didn't really want to start at as close to the top as possible. I wanted to start, down near the bottom. Not saying that D3 is the bottom, it's got a lot of competition there, a lot of good teams. But when I first found Dominican, I noticed that they were high up in the RPI rankings. Not that I knew that that was that important. I didn't really think it was, especially that early. But I noticed that it had some quality players. Um, it had some history. And also, importantly, it was in a location that I was familiar with. It's in a city, San Rafael, California, that I had personally been to and enjoyed spending time in, hanging out at when I was growing up. So it wasn't completely random. Also, the nickname is solid. It's the Penguins, so you gotta love those tuxedoed birds. Um, yeah, so those are just some of the things I initially saw and looked at when I was signing up for a team. Yeah. What about you, Rob?
So I think the very first thing I thought of was location of university, right? So just like in regular high school recruiting, college recruiting, you think about some of the hotbeds of talent, your Florida, Texas, New York, California, even Washington, right? Seattle's a hotbed for basketball, but you really think about those powerhouse schools, the high schools, and where a lot of talent is coming from. And knowing that the game has some like in-state, in-region advantages, my first thought was like, okay, well, I want to end up in California, as a starter. And so a lot of the California teams were taken at the time.
Hmm.
Um, and I was really looking for a project, right? Like you mentioned, do you want to walk into a good situation? Do you want to walk into a total project? Like, how do you foresee your future? I wanted a complete project. I wanted to take a school that was completely at the bottom and see how far I can rise them up, right? That was my first goal. And so I ended up on the Santa Clara Broncos, who at the time when I took them over, I think it was like 9 or 10 days into that season, had two scholarship players. And the best overall rated player on the team was a 1-star walk on, good old Arnie Daniels.
Hmm.
So I knew that that was going to be a complete project, a complete rebuild, but like that's exactly what I was searching for. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so like for me, it was walking into a completely bad situation and then just grinding out the few seasons that you have to get to the point where like your team's respectable, right? And now a couple seasons later, that team's in D2, and I'm really excited. I think we have a good chance to promote to D1 if everything goes well. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it helps that, like you said, California, we're natives of California, so we wanted to pick teams in California. And, I told Rob about this game like a day after I signed up. And so luckily Santa Clara was in the same conference as Dominican. So that helps. So I remember those teams, those early years for you and Arnie Daniels very well, playing against him.
yeah, Arnie, he had the greenest of green lights.
Oh yeah.
If he could have shot every time down the court, we would have been okay with it.
I thought that was the plan.
That was the plan, but the game never executed it ever.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so you mentioned like walking into a good situation or taking over a complete project. You know, the things you're going to look for, well, we'll go over those
Yeah,
in a bit. Yeah, so what should you look for? Well, you don't want to go in blind, right? Some simple research, like we've kind of talked about, it can save you a lot of hassle, a lot of just like, oh, I don't want to play this game anymore. It can really just make your experience get off on the right foot, I'd say.
yeah. And my brother signed up for the game and kind of blind, just wanted to get into a conference that we were in, take a team and see like if he could compete. But because he walked into a situation that wasn't ideal, he didn't really do his research. He was kind of off the game after a couple of weeks. So that's sort of something that we're referencing. Really, taking it doesn't even take that long either. Just taking some time to look at a school's prestige, what their roster's like, and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I'd say probably the biggest factor in determining the state of your program is the current roster. So obviously, we talk about SI, the skill index, the talent of the team. That's going to be a huge factor, right? The better you are, the better you're going to be. Simple as that. But there's other things. You know, size is a huge thing. A lot of bot teams, they don't recruit size, and you'll see this in the forums in the Discord. The first piece of advice any new owner gets is you need to recruit size because your team lacks it.
Yep.
I think with Dominican when I first took over, we had one player. No, we had two players 6'9" or over. At least two players on scholarship 6'9" or over, and that was it. I had to play a 6'5" player as my starting power forward a lot of the times, and backup center or third string center, I guess. Um, so yeah, we needed size right away there. So yeah, size is just a huge thing. It can make a big difference in the result of the game.
Yeah, and so an example of that right off the top of the head. So I'm an alumni of UC Irvine, and I want to take over that school, but unfortunately, it's already taken. But when I was scouting that school to see if I can't, to see if it taking over it in the future might be a possibility, I noticed that they were really good at SI, but then there was no size. Like I remember their center was like 6'4" at the time when I looked, and
Oh,
yeah, like 6'4", and their power forward was like 6'3", and I was like, what is going on here? But they were really high SI rated, and the whole depth chart, right? The whole starting lineup was really high SI rated, but you can only get away with so much if you're lacking that size, especially if you go up against guys that are like 6'9", 6'10", 7 feet
mhm.
plus, and that team struggled. And so, that's an example of walking into a situation where like, oh, hey, these guys are really talented, but like you have no size, you're gonna fail. That's just how basketball works, right?
Yeah. 6'4" center definitely does not sound ideal. That said, you can still succeed. You can still make it work with that. Maybe not that extreme because that's pretty far extreme.
Yeah.
But if you have a 6'6" center, it's doable. So what are some other things to look for at
So
maybe a slightly deeper level?
yeah. So I mean, obviously you want to see a team's prestige, right? So what have they done in the past? There's some certain factors that build up a team's prestige, and that can come into play with recruiting and things like that. What
Hmm.
division are they in? What conference, right? Like obviously if they're Division 3 or 2, but what's the conference look like as well? Like, are you going to have really stiff competition? Is it primarily bots? Is it primarily users? Are your first 2 or 3 years going to be like 2 and 38 seasons or what? So there's
Right.
just some things to look at, and then also like, hey, what's their recruiting situation like? If it's a poorly mismanaged or bot team, or a poorly managed former user team, maybe they spent a bunch of points somewhere that was never going to pay off, right? So what's their current recruiting situation look like? How many guys are they on? Do they have any good interest levels already, or are they already behind on so many guys? Doesn't look like they're going to land anyone. Um,
Yeah, and just how many scholarships does the team even have available? Because, I mean, that can be a good thing or a bad thing, really. I mean, you want players on scholarship, they're probably your best players. They usually are. But having players on scholarship can also kind of be a deterrent in recruiting, because it's explained in the rules. A lot of recruits they want to play right away. So if you have no scholarship players, well, a recruit's going to see that and think that's immediate playing time I'm going to get there over a school full of scholarships. I'm that player is going to have to redshirt, and they don't want to do that all the time.
yeah, I think that's a feature that's
Yeah,
coded into the game, right? Is
yeah,
immediate playing time. Players are going to want that.
right. And so we can talk about, yeah, if usually when you're taking over a team, whether it's bought or it had an absentee owner, um, you're probably going to have a lot of scholarships available. And so what's there's a few different strategies. So what are some strategies you could use to fill out your roster?
So I think the most important thing that you want to answer for yourself, and maybe something that we didn't really realize when we joined the game, is like, you want to recruit guys to fit the style of play that you want to play, right? And we sort of walked in blind, and then well, at least for my first recruiting class, I remember just going after guys that, um, you know, hey, I need skill. Like I'm just going to jump into skill, because I have no scholarship players. But I found myself recruiting a certain archetype. I wanted high speed, high IQ. And then my first season, I just played really fast because I was at a talent disadvantage. And so I was like, maybe this will be advantageous for me. But then I just
Hmm.
developed that kind of profile for Santa Clara. I want to play really fast. And so I needed to recruit guys that are high speed, high IQ, good ball handling, so they can get up and down the court and stuff like that. But maybe like you want to build like a really strong defensive team, right? Maybe you want to slow it out or slow it down and grind it out and minimize possessions and make sure that you're getting a lot of turnovers, and that your team may be really strong on the perimeter in terms of defense. I remember that was one of the early things that you looked to develop that I had never thought about, and I think it's sort of paid off for you more, than maybe my system has. But the overall general point being like familiarize yourself with what sort of different options you have in terms of the playing style that you can have, and then find guys that'll fit that style right away.
Right. Well, I mean, you kind of, I'd say you played to the roster's strengths that you inherited too. You know, it seemed like Santa Clara wanted to play fast, run and gun, didn't have great defenders, so you were gonna just try to outrun the other team. You know, I kind of more imposed how I wanted my team to play. And I know you said you wanted to run and gun anyways, but you were more adaptable to your team versus I made my roster adapt to how I wanted them to play. I feel like too. Um,
Which
but yeah, like
I think is a better idea, right? Because so I sort of, like you said, I adopted that playing style, um, but and then ran with it. But like I really want to have like a slow, grinded out defensive team. And so maybe I adopted a style too early that I thought would be advantageous when it's not. And you really took the time to understand, like, okay, this is the sort of team I want to have. Here's the guys I need to get in that program and how I'm going to play. And I think that's benefited you largely.
I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages, as there always is to anything in this game,
Yeah, of
which
course.
is the beautiful thing, really. But yeah, so yeah, it's how do you want to play, or how do you think your roster will be? Yeah, there's just different approaches you can take. So obviously that there's positions you could just recruit all centers, um, and then you'll probably eventually have to move some of the guard, or just all big players. Rob has mentioned this before. I particularly look for length, so wingspan. Um, I've started to look towards like the secondary physical traits like weight and vertical, even being a lot more impactful than I had initially thought. So, yeah, we all see the height. We all want the 6'9" guy or 6'7" guy even, but if he's 180 pounds,
With
that's
a 14
someone
inch
who's going to
vertical.
drop with a 14-inch vertical. Oh my gosh, we saw that. Yeah. Yeah, I legitimately saw someone with a 14-inch vertical. It's not someone you really want.
Right.
I mean, it's not to say he can't be helpful, but you might want to focus your attention towards someone else.
Yeah. Um, and I think one of the things that you've been really good at is, okay, obviously you developed your playing style, but then you started really digging into players, right? You started really digging into prospects and seeing, some of the more fine details of each of the prospects. And so maybe you can speak a little bit about to some of those skills that you look for, like, hey, how do I find a sleeper? How do I find a guy that is maybe under recruited that can fit my program so I don't have to be in a ton of competition?
Yeah, so the first thing I do when I look for recruits is I'll sort by how many teams are on them, and usually I'll just go straight to the players that have none on them. First off, that's how you know someone's under recruited.
Yeah.
The first place you start at least.
But there's going to be a whole lot longer of a list of guys that have none on them versus guys that you actually want to take.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, Rob has mentioned a few things that maybe are a little more hidden, or, that you just have to dig a little bit to find. So the first thing, the most important number, if we had to pick just one, is the skill index, right? And we all want our players to grow. So you should look at the growth rate of that skill index. And obviously, we only have their high school, maybe junior college record to really track, but that's data that you can use to project how fast, how much they'll grow in in their skill index.
So
Yeah,
one of the things is like a player has potential, right? Like we call it pot, but a potential level, 10, 11, 12, 13, now 14 and 15 even. But and so those are sort of thought, at least from my understanding on the forums and Discord and stuff, those are thought as ceilings, right? So SI
yeah,
ceilings. If you're a
yeah,
13 pot, you're going to get to a certain SI ceiling versus a 12 pot kind of guy.
yeah,
And so, but maybe potential, a higher potential isn't always indicative of a player actually being able to grow fast, right? And I think you have some really good examples of that we can talk about in a bit.
mhm.
But your system of looking for solid SI growth year after year in high school, it probably plays out better than just looking for straight up 13 potentials or higher, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So Rob nailed it on the head. You know, they might have that 13 potential, but it may not show as a 13 potential or 12 or whatever the number is, you know. And some, it could be good or bad. You know, some players, they might be 11, but they might grow like a 12 potential or higher, and obviously lower too. So, um, yeah, should we show some examples, Rob?
Yeah, I think the best way for beginners especially is to just jump into examples, right?
Okay. Yeah.
We could talk about it theoretically, but if they see actual examples on the hardwood screen, it might bring it to life.
Yeah, Med Forte. He's on Marquette. Marquette's a good team. They're a good program in this game. So you'll see he's a 12 potential right here. He's got a great SI right now at 125 for a redshirt freshman. But you'll notice he entered college as a 116 SI, and that means he only grew 9 in his lone year so far in his redshirt year. You notice he didn't play any minutes, so that's something to notice. Um, and I'm not sure about Marquette's development record with their coach. We can check that. Let's check that right now. It looks like their coach, Doug Courtney, is just a 5 in development, so that's not very strong, right? We want higher than 10 at least. I mean, preferably as high as possible.
Yeah,
Um,
and something to note is that they just as of last season had a head coaching change.
oh, really? I
Yeah,
didn't
they
even notice
did. So
that.
they went from a guy named Samuel Spencer who was getting up there in age,
Mm-hmm.
but had a 15 player development rating.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Good catch.
So yeah, so guys make head coaching decisions all the time, and it's hard, especially when your coach gets old. But you sort of see that drop off, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. And not to call out biggest Marquette fan. Great name for the school, by the way. Um, but yeah, we just noticed a player. I was once looking at Forte, so that's why he came to mind. It's not because I have a vendetta against this owner or anything. Um, but he grew 9 in his lone year. Not great. Usually we want them to at least hit that pot number. For Forte, if he grew at least 12, then we're like, okay, he's on the right track. Um, Obviously, the more the better. But you'll notice you could probably kind of project that lower number based on his high school numbers, high school growth. So he got 14 in his freshman year, and then he grew just 9 in his sophomore year, and then 9 again in his junior year, and then 10 in his senior year. So 9, 9, and 10. That's obviously lower than 12. So it's pretty subpar when we're talking about a 12 potential player, basically. And again, he has that high number to begin with, so he's a useful player. He should be good, but later on, he might only be a 150 at the end of his career, 160, which I mean we'd be happy with.
Yeah.
um, but for Marquette, who's in division, they're in LL2.
Yeah, LL2. Yeah.
Is that a starter? I don't know. I don't.
Probably not. Probably good depth piece, but
Yeah, probably not a starter for most of his career. I know he's starting for 7 games, but I know Marquette's in a bit of a situation right now with they need to develop some. So yeah, so
but
Ned
also
Forte.
something to look at, right? Is like a lot of times in high school, guys won't start their first and second year, so they won't
Hmm.
start freshman, sophomore year, and that might hinder their development a little bit. And then the first time they get 30 minutes a game and they're starting all of their games, they have a development pop. But even
Hmm.
in this case, he's at 28, 29.9, 30.5, 29.2 minutes in high school, and he started every game but two, right?
Yeah,
And so
animation.
even with those numbers, and that much that many minutes, he still wasn't growing.
Right, yeah. So we've kind of mentioned playing time, minutes being important. You'll probably read that in the rules or you hear that a lot. Minutes equals development, pretty much. The more minutes you play, the more you'll develop. And there's definitely other factors, but that's the main currency, I'd say, of development.
Yeah, you want to get guys minutes, you want to get guys starts. You can have a good development coach, but if somebody's not playing a ton, it's going to slow down or it's going to hinder their growth, really.
Yeah, so Forte was maybe one of the more negative examples um, that we could come up with. So a more positive example, who should I pick, Rob? I have a whole
I
whole
go with
bunch.
Clevenger.
Clevenger. Okay,
Go with
so
Clevenger.
this will probably be a bit more talking about our players because we just know them better. But this is one of my boys with Dominican, and so he's a 13 potential. So great potential already, or a good target for potential. Um, so he's 149 right now as a redshirt sophomore. Um, you'll notice he started college at 101, but then improved by 23 in just our redshirt year. But he played 30 minutes a game in 5 games. So I tried to max out that playing time as much as possible. I didn't play him 40 minutes. I guess I could have done more. Um, but then he grew 23 more points in that redshirt freshman year. So 46 points already in college, which is kind of astounding,
It's
really.
insane. It's insane, let's be real.
But we could kind of predict that based on his high school growth. So you'll see 16 in his freshman year, then 22 in his sophomore year. If it's over
Which
20, that's very, very good.
yeah, and that number coincides with his first chance to be almost a full-time starter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like Rob mentioned, right? He only played 15 minutes a game in his freshman year, improved by 16. Then he went up to 26, improved by 22. And then he played 31 minutes and improved by 17 points in that junior year, and then 28 minutes and improved still by 14. So again, all of those numbers are higher than that potential of 13, right? We've talked about Forte being that 9, 9, 10. All of these years in growth were higher than 13. So again, you could kind of project up on Clevenger's growth. And I don't know how much he'll grow this year. I'm hoping he gets to like 165. Um, and you know what? That might be low. That might be a low projection.
But I mean, you still have 3 seasons left of starting level really good player because of that growth.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
So,
I guarantee there's almost anybody in the game that would take a 149 SI guy as a sophomore.
right. And then I can highlight some other things about Clevenger that I really like. Obviously, he's 6'5". I think he was projected like 6'8" when I first started recruiting him. Oh, you see 6'8"
Yeah,
right
6'8".
here. He's fallen short. I never really needed him to be 6'8". He's going to be my small forward. 6'5" is plenty tall. But he's 240 pounds. That's pretty hefty, to be honest. Um, that is, I think, one of my heaviest players at small forward. So he's thrown his weight around, and he's got 12 strength, so he really uses that weight. But he's also super fast, or not super fast, pretty fast.
Pretty fast for his size. Yeah.
Yeah, and then respectable vertical, respectable wingspan, especially for that size. Um, so he's just solid all around, I'd say. And yeah, hopefully he's my future star. As
Yeah.
I hopefully promote to D1.
So just a couple of points. Number one, like, you briefly touched on it, but I think we should expand on it, especially for new guys. If you are planning on redshirting a player, find as many minutes as you can for him in that season without him losing eligibility, right? For redshirt. And so the cutoff in this game is 5 games worth of play. right? But you get those 3 exhibition games at the start of the season, and then you can choose 5 games throughout the season that you want to play him in. But also, let's say you don't actually make a national tourney or anything, you get an invitational games invite. Those are free games. That's not going to count against his red shirt. So you should find every single available minute to play a guy that you're planning on redshirting that you really can, especially if you're in a bad situation, because any minute is going to help with growth.
That's like a really great point. Yeah, I see every year. Do the invitation the question in the forums? Do the invitational games count towards the games played? No, they don't. So there it is.
Utilize those. Yeah. Play 30
Utilize
minutes
them. Yeah.
plus for your guys. I mean, and they're invitational games, so it's not like your season is win or lose, or what you consider a good versus a bad season, because invitational games.
Yeah.
So play your guys. Play the guys you really want.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay.
Well, real
We.
quick, still
Yeah.
staying on Clevenger, I think for new players or for new guys to the game, maybe we can go through a quick little checklist of things that you look for, because I think you're probably a really good recruiter. Just to remind them, right?
Sure.
So number one, you want good size for their position that you expect them to play at,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Size.
Like
Yep.
if you were planning on playing Clevenger at center, it would never work out.
Yeah, it'd be tough. It'd be tough. Just based on the height, it'd be tough. I mean, the weight is probably fine for that and the strength, but the height is definitely too short. Um, and then the other thing, of course, is his interior defense is only a 7. And we'll get into maybe how that might be different in a different scenario, though, later on.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, right now he'd be not a great center. So yeah, height, the weight, the wingspan, the vertical, I'm looking at those.
So you want
The
the physical intangibles for the side for the specific position that you plan on playing the player at. That's
Yeah,
first thing.
physical. Yeah. The second thing, and maybe the first thing, maybe definitely one of the first things I look at is the recruiting evaluation.
Right.
And he doesn't need to be perfect. Look, he's gonna struggle in a slower tempo offense. Dominican, I'll be honest, they don't play slow. It may not come out like that, and when you look at the stats on the possessions per game, it's been weird. But I don't play slow with Dominican, so that doesn't matter. And every other thing on this eval is positive, right? The two particularly big things I look for are good all around defensive player, or great all around defensive player, obviously is best, and good all around player, and or excellent all around player for some. Those are the two things I look for. I also look at shooting. I just I there's 3 shooting comments really: inside shot, outside shot, range. This good shooter refers specifically to the outside shot rating. And you'll see long range shooter for shooting range. You'll see post moves for inside shot. If I had to pick one, it's going to be this one, the shooter for outside shot. Now, ideally, he has both this shooter comment and the range shooting comment, because he's going to be a perimeter player. But it's okay, he doesn't have that. He doesn't need to be perfect. He's plenty good. If I'm looking at a big man, I want the inside shot and outside shot combo. Um, yeah. So
And so
that.
just to touch on that a little bit, for anybody that might be new, there's going to be a couple levels to each comment, right? So there's positive comments like can be a good all-around defensive player, but as you mentioned, there's also can be a great all-around defensive player. And sometimes you'll also see like can be a great all-around defensive player, can be or for example could be a good all-around defensive player, will always be a poor perimeter defender.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can also see positive negative comments on the same sort of thing, but that's telling you, hey, maybe this guy's gonna be really good interior wise, or the comments reverse and it could be perimeter. And
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, and like for example here he has can be a monster on the boards, right? And so that tells you his rebounding category is going to continue to go up over time, versus can be a good rebounder, or can be a never be a good rebounder or something.
Right. So there's a few things I wanted to hit on there. First off, with the monster on the boards, he's a small forward. I don't really care that he's a monster on the boards, because my small forwards, I don't need to necessarily rebound. But it's good to have that comment. He still can get rebounds. It'd be much less valuable if he was a shooting guard or a point guard. So, but it's not as valuable if as if he was a power forward or center.
Right.
So it's that balance. I mean, it's nice to have. And then the second thing I wanted to hit on was that combo of if he was a good all-around defensive player or great, but also had a negative comment regarding his interior perimeter defense. And so we're honestly not too sure on this, but I've read some things. And so when it says good all-around defensive player, we think that's kind of like a combination of these two things hitting a certain threshold. I don't know exactly what that threshold is. Maybe it's like 24 combined. So like that could be hit in any number of combinations of these two numbers. You know, these go from 1 to 20, right? Um, so, you know, whatever number it hits, those numbers have the potential to go beyond that or hit that or beyond. Um, but if it has a negative comment, like will never be a good interior defender, that means it's that specific one won't go past a certain number. So if there were a combination, it would mean I wish I had something to like draw on right
Yeah.
now. But let's say that threshold for good all around defense player is 24, but the negative comment threshold was like 6. So that means out of those 24 points, a maximum of 6 are going to go towards interior defense. And that would leave a maximum of, or somewhere around 18 potentially that could go to perimeter defense, which that's an excellent perimeter defender then.
Lockdown.
Yeah, like I that might be one of the highest I've ever seen, you know. So that's what we mean by well, we'll get into that with like player builds and stuff
Yeah.
probably in a future episode, but a little bit here too. Yeah, so I know I expanded on that a lot, but
No, it's
that's
good. I think this is all relevant information for somebody that's new to the game or somebody that's even been playing for like a season or two. I mean, we're just giving good examples of sort of the things that we've thought of as we've, and we've only been playing the game for like what, 7 months. So,
right.
so we're just expanding on the things that we think we've come to learn might be important.
Right, right, yeah. So yeah, again, we're not experts. We've only been playing for 7 months. You know, this game is like a little over 2 years old, and some people have been playing since the beginning.
Yeah.
They know more, but we think we know a good amount too.
And we're going to get those guys on the show. Some of the more experienced players. I think,
Ooh,
like
yeah.
we said, everybody's going to benefit from that. So
Hmm.
we'll see you, Bridger. Can't wait to get you on the show.
Yeah. Is there another player you wanted to highlight potentially?
Yeah. So we have a couple different scenarios maybe that we could talk about.
Yeah.
A guy that you didn't expect to have like a huge impact that had a really huge impact, but also maybe like once we get into the international pool, sort of what does their growth look like versus a domestic player? So maybe we can start on, as an example, a guy that had a really big impact that we didn't expect,
Sure,
right?
yeah. So I would say one of your players, right, with SUNY Oswego, Dalton Wallace, fits that criteria. You want to talk about him?
Yeah. So like when I took over Oswego, we immediately, just like almost every other team, we needed size, right? Like that was my very first indicator. But I took over Oswego midway through the season, I believe. And so all of the really good guys, teams were on. And I was like, all right, I just need to take someone that's going to fill minutes as a center with size. Dalton Wallace is 7 feet. He's about 215 pounds. He's got a 7'3" wingspan with a 30-inch vertical. So he's gonna have an impact, right? Like just size wise alone. Like, and so that was something I was looking for.
To
Um,
be honest, he's a little thin.
yeah, he's a little thin, right? 215. Yeah, Clevenger outweighs him. Um, but even in this case, he's a little thin, 215 pounds, but he's a 17 strength, so he's
Right,
loaded. He's
right.
ripped. He's ripped.
He's ripped.
He's ripped. But so we talked a ton about like SI development growth in high school and how that being a good predictor. And if you look here, freshman year, he in a season where he only played 8 minutes a game, he jumped 15, which was kind of surprising.
Wow.
Some 43 to 58, yeah. And then as he started getting minutes, it seems like he slowed down. So he went 58 to 69, which is 11, and then 69 to 78, which is 9, and then 78 to 88, which is 10. Right. And he's only 11 potential. So it's not like we expected great growth from him or anything. I wasn't expecting him to really pop off the board. But he was somebody that I needed to go to right away. He was going to be in the starting lineup. I was going to play him a ton of minutes. As you can see, he started 41 games, played 29 minutes a game, average 14.8 and 8 boards essentially. And he went from 88 SI to 106. So, I mean, that's an 18 pop,
Mm-hmm.
which was completely not expected. And you know, Oswego has a decent development coach, but it's not like, you know, off the board or anything like that. So I just completely wasn't expecting that. And so this might be a case of, you know, utilization, right? He played so many minutes, he's shooting a ton. He's getting the ball a ton. He won freshman of the year, to have that sort of 18 pop. And then I decided, well, I need to redshirt this guy because, you know, I need to preserve his minutes or preserve his years now that he's a playable SI. And even in his redshirt year, he went plus 14. So I was pretty excited to see that. And then sophomore to junior, 120 to 136. But I mean, here's an example of a pretty low SI guy, a 2-star recruit, right? You know, his eval's okay, above average post moves, could be an excellent shooter, can be a smart player, will be a below average ball handler. You see no rebounding comment, you see no defensive comment, right?
Hmm.
Um, it doesn't also have can be a good all around player, so you don't really think his strength speed is going to get there, things like that. But he was just a guy I went after. But even in this case, where he's a 2-star, low SI growth, doesn't have a great eval, you can see his strength got all the way up to 17. His rebounding is at 11, which is okay. Interior defense is 9. You know, so he's maybe not the best defender, and that kind of can show in the offensive or the opponent field goal percentage,
Right.
which is steadily going down over time.
Yeah, yeah, it's improved.
But I mean, for all intents and purposes, I didn't expect this to be a starting player, and he's been an anchor.
Right. And I mean, maybe some people who listen are gonna be like, well, that was in D3, that was LL6 and then LL5. But, you gotta recruit for your level too.
Yeah,
And, he's playing against who he can. Uh, you know, um, so all of these concepts can be applicable still to anybody, we feel like.
yeah,
Obviously, it's easier to find the diamonds in the rough, these sleepers at the lower levels, while your team is at the lower levels. But I think there's talent everywhere that can be mined and used um, for whatever.
yeah. I mean, for sure. You know, I this is just a good example of a guy that popped that we didn't expect. You
Yeah.
know, just really good usage, playing him a lot. And you know, his numbers are a little bit down this year, 16.3 and 7.6,
Mm-hmm.
as we jumped up to Division Two. But you know, he's playing alongside a really, really talented sophomore in Kerry Schultz. Um, you know, shout out Lincoln. Uh, that we didn't really, you know,
That's
so touches are going down. And also, he
nice
was really
Carrie
high
Schultz.
usage early on, but if you sort by SI real quick, we're a pretty talented squad now, right? We have a really good young shooting guard, good small forward. So there's talent distribution across the board, for small players. So he's not getting the ball as much. So we'll see how he holds his ground in D2. But overall, I mean, that's like an unexpected find. So
Right. Right.
yeah,
Yeah. So then you mentioned an international guy who maybe hasn't been as good as we had hoped. And so here's our prime example of that type of player.
yeah. Unfortunately, also one of my players. Andrew is really hesitant to go after international players, and you know, I don't blame him.
Two 2 years of data. We want 2 years of data.
Yeah, and no, it's fair, and I don't blame him, especially with how a lot of my international players have played out. I think your best bet with internationals is to get if you're going to get the really good guys, the 4s and 5 stars that have highest size to start out with, then the growth over year isn't going to be as great, so you won't need it really. This is at least generally what we've seen, but so Modest Lukas is a Lithuanian player that I battled with Arkansas State for. Shout out Jay Olson. And really, this is a situation. Okay, so this is a recruitment I didn't expect to win. I got on him late. And at the time he committed, I was medium interest level, and Arkansas State was high. And so I was shocked that he signed with me. Um, but you know, he has a really good eval, right? Could be a very good post player, could be a really long range shooter, could be a monster on the board, smart player. You know, all the positive comments you'd expect. He's a 5-star, the number 22 overall rank in the class. And so here I am thinking, okay, great. I've got like, you know, a guy that's going to anchor my team pretty well. He's starting off at 1 of 14 SI. But then you see I redshirted him as a 5-star, which was probably, you know, in hindsight, not the best idea. Um, but he grew in his redshirt year 8, and then in his first year starting, he grew 12, which isn't even reaching that potential level. Now he was a backup last year who played only 17.6 minutes, so maybe that hindered his growth. He's starting this year and he's going to play a full 30 minutes, so we'll see if he grows, you know, commensurate with that. But the same time, it just like, that growth, we've seen other guys that grow in their redshirt year or in their first year with minutes much more. Um, that growth did never reached what I expected, really.
Right, and he only grew 5 points in his commitment year.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
but that's not something you really could know because again, we only have that one season, and it's ongoing while you're recruiting him. So it's not like you have that history. Um, so yeah, that's one example. The number one international player. I know last year's number one international player, he grew by like 20 or 25 or something.
yeah,
Uh, so he started out really high and then he went even higher. I forget his name, Cardoza, I believe.
yeah. I think I know who you're talking
Um,
about.
yeah, I don't have him pulled up right now, but so as risky as some internationals are, it's it's a risk. So it's high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
I'd say.
And a lot of guys mind the international pool for bigs because bigs are so hard to come by in general, and they're
Mhm.
so competitive. And I think that's a totally valid situation. Even if they're slow SI growth, bigs can sort of compensate on that with a really good physical profile, kind of like we've highlighted a little bit. And so bigs might be like particularly more attractive in the international market versus other positions, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anyone else you want to look at?
Um, is there anybody you wanted to highlight? Maybe like a super good SI growth guy?
So this is Ron Ritter. I noticed him as now he's one of the best players on this Michigan Tech team. That's playing really well. I think they're undefeated right now.
Yeah, they're like
Um,
7-0 or something.
yeah, yeah. And um, you can see his growth in high school. He started out at 25, then he went up 19, and then he went up 21, and then he got 17, and then just a 7. So that ending wasn't great compared to all the rest. Um, but then in college, in a redshirt season, he got I can't do math, 22.
22. Yeah.
The nines are always hard for me. And then he got plus 21. So again, that's plus 20.
That's
Sorry,
31, Andrew.
31. I can't do, and now it wasn't even nine. It's 31. So that's a plus 53 in 2 seasons,
That
which
is
is
ridiculous.
that's an unheard of number, right?
If if anybody out there has seen a plus 31 season or better, or a plus what you said 53 over 2 seasons in
Hmm.
development, let us know. We want to highlight those players. We want to see them. But I mean, that's ridiculous growth.
Yeah. Well, here's one who had we talked about him last time, who had a higher, he had a plus 32 in his sophomore season.
Yeah, yeah, that's
So,
insane.
but that's kind of, it's not expected necessarily, but he's a 13 pot, right? Ron Ritter's only a 12 pot.
Yep.
So, that makes a difference. Um, and then I'm going to show an 11 pot because, we've been talking 12 pots, 13 pots, you know, 11 pots can grow a lot too. 10 pots can too. So this is one of my guys with New Rochelle, Craig Hammond. And, his high school growth was kind of modest, 12, 12, 10, 9, and nothing great. But then in his redshirt season, where he didn't even play 30 minutes, he didn't even start all 5 games, he went up 16, which is higher than any number here. It's higher than that 11 pot. Then he went up 20, which, whoa, now that's huge. And then 17, which is again huge. I think he's getting kind of close to his cap, to be honest, because he hasn't grown yet, and I'm getting sad. Um, but he's already done a lot, and yeah, so you can find these sleepers, these values at any potential level, any star rating. Here's a 2 star. A bunch of the guys we've looked at are 3 stars. Yeah, some 5 stars, of course, but again, you can find talent anywhere in a lot of different forms. Again, we look at the size: 6'11", 7'4" wingspan, 28 vertical, which is nothing great. But
Oh
yeah,
wait, little
that
light there.
it's a little light. Yeah, we talked about SI growth a lot, but there's another really hidden thing that a lot of people don't know about. So I'm going to talk about height. And Craig Hammond is a great example of the height. So again, you can see he's 6'11", right? He was 6'3" starting out in high school, which is very tall for a freshman. But then he stalled out for 2 years, 2 more years, at 6'3", and then he grew, and then he grew. But players grow, obviously. I think we all see that. But when they have these stalls, it's actually good for them. I actually, when I first started the game, I didn't think they were good. I thought, oh, I don't want a player who's going to stall in the growth. That's bad. It means they've already grown. It actually means their growth is going to happen later and it's going to compress. Think of like a spring. You push it down, it compresses, and then you release it and it shoots out. And a lot of force is released. And now I'm bringing in engineering talk. It's similar with height. You compress it down, and then when you release it, they shoot up even more, right? So 6'3" coming, if I just saw this height, I would initially think he's going to be 6'9". I forget his projected height when I first started recruiting him. I think it was 6'11". But he stalled out, and then he went up 2 inches, but then he went up 3.5, and then he went up 3. Usually, when I first see a player, I'm going to think they're going to grow 6 inches. That's like the baseline that I think they'll grow. 6 inches, maybe 7 inches if they get the halves here and there. But for a player to grow 8.5 inches, that's a lot. So again, I looked for those stalling years, and that's how I kind of knew he would even overshoot his projected height. And I know it's not anymore, but yeah, it's close enough.
Yeah. And so that's another relevant point, maybe for a beginner, is like the projected height. Players are going to fall short of that. They might overgrow it. Projected height is just like a rough estimate.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you see a guy at 7 foot projected height, don't always assume he's going to reach that, right? Because there are some indicators that might tell you he's not going to reach that. And one of those things, like you said, is the different growth spurts. But even wingspan, if a guy's projected height is 7 foot, but his wingspan is like 6'6", that might be an indicator that he's never going to reach 7 foot. And so there's some things to keep your eye on in terms of growth. But I think one of the things that you put me on, like you said, is that, expect a certain amount of growth periods, and then hopefully you get good numbers out of it. And that's how you can
Right.
sort of
Yeah.
project bigs.
Right. So I've seen in Fury in the Discord put me on this, and he has his own formula and ideas too. And again, he's more experienced than we are, so definitely listen to him too.
Hopefully future podcast guests.
Yeah, yeah. I've noticed that players have like a small growth spurt, a medium growth spurt, and a large growth spurt. So I put those numbers at 1, 2, and 3. So that's how I got that 6 inches of growth. But when they compress down, it's almost like it takes away that small one and replaces it with a medium. And then if it compresses again for a third year, like Hammond, then it takes away one of those mediums and puts it at a large. So now we get that 2, 3, and 3, right? Or if it was just one stall out, then 3, 2, 2. So that's kind of how I do it in my head. It's not foolproof, most definitely. I have yet to find out on some players that I'm interested in the future, so we'll see. But that's just kind of what I've noticed looking at a lot of players, and I've looked at a lot of players.
You've looked at a ridiculous amount of players.
And so, Hammond was an example of someone who overshot that growth, or really, grew a lot. And here's, Clevenger again. Again, he fell short of that projected height, even though he had a stall out, in his freshman to sophomore year, right? So you look at that, he grew 1.5 inches in high school, and then another 3 inches. So again, he had that 1.5. That's a small 3, which is big, and then he grew another 3 inches. So even though he had a stall out and had 2 3-inch growth spurts, he fell short. So again, that projected height is not the end all be all number. It's certainly not always right. So you want to try to calculate your own projected height based on what you see in these numbers, right? And then the other thing that you should look out for, right? We mentioned the good all-around player, and there's a common misconception about this term in the community, I'd say. Good all-around player, it's a good thing to have, right? Or excellent all-around player, but it does not really refer to um, all of the skills. It doesn't refer to the development rate. In my research, it only refers to strength and speed, or sorry, strength and stamina directly, right? So, some people think it refers to all of the categories. I don't believe it does. I'm going to put a link right here. Oh, my finger disappears on this side, in this corner, from that thread. And, they talk about it a little bit, what this means. And so, having this, again, it's good. It means that there's no negative comments anywhere here. And it refers to strength and speed, or stamina. I keep saying speed, strength and stamina. Um, right. So,
But
again,
also, so there are no comments for strength directly, but there are
right. Yeah,
comments
there's,
directly for speed and stamina.
right. Yeah. So there's no, exactly right. So there are, and we can talk about a little bit more of that. Obviously, some of these ratings, some of these skills have comments. They can be positive or negative, and some only have positive comments. I don't think any have only negative. But and then some ratings have nothing. Finishing and driving have nothing. Um, what else? What else has nothing? I
Strength.
think, yeah, strength has nothing. Um, right. So that's where you have to kind of do some digging. Look at the growth rate throughout high school, in those specific categories. And you can do that by going down here to development graph, and it'll break down the growth of every single skill for the entire time they've been in this game,
Yep.
which is really valuable. All right.
Always nice to visualize it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so we're going to talk about some more deep things. Um,
We're gonna sort of get into some of the things that we've thought up throughout our time playing, but there's no real clear answer to, as far as we can see, and sort of some of the finer details of player growth and positions and how it can affect a player growth or how it cannot. And so just some of the deeper details that nerds like us would think up on a hike, like we did last Friday.
yeah. Right. So that the main question we have was, does the position that a player plays affect the skills that they improve in, right? So you would expect a point guard to improve in passing more than they'd improve in rebounding, right? That
Right.
makes sense. But each player has their own ceiling overall, right? We talked about that with the potential. Theoretically, each skill has their own ceiling for that player, right? We see that in the comments of that recruiting evaluation. So if each skill has its own ceiling and overall the ceiling of the player, would playing a player at a different position that they may not have experience in, would that hurt or help their SI growth rate?
Right. So like maybe a guy played center all throughout or power forward all throughout high school, and but they have positive skill comments on or positive skill comments on passing and ball handling, which you'll see like it's actually there. Or they might be like a high IQ player and exceptional passer kind of thing. And so the thought is, well, they played center throughout their entire time in high school. But maybe I want to transition to him as small forward. Maybe he's got a good enough speed and perimeter defense I can transition him there. Or maybe I want to transition him to point guard. Or maybe you have like a small forward that transitioned to a point guard because he has positive comments, and sort of what are the finer intricacies of that. And so I think you have the most relevant example here of players that were out of position in high school or that played a certain position in high school that you played them at a different position in college.
Yeah, yeah. So with Dominican, again, here's Cliff Stuckey. He's my point guard. But in high school, I'm going to go to his overall.
Yeah.
In high school, he was more of a power forward, right? You see here, and that where I have the cursor, he played the most of his minutes at power forward, some at center. So, and he's 6'7". That's solid height for a big man with a 6'10" wingspan. You know, you see his rebounding is a 12, his interior defense is a 9. He can be a decent rebounder. Um, but he also has skilled passer with exceptional court vision and decent ball handling. So while he was a big man in high school, I have moved him to point guard because of those passing comments. And you can see where he is right now in those. So you know, I don't know how the position change has really affected his growth. It looks like it's been good because, you know, he's an 11 pot. He grew 14 and 15, which are really good. But then he only grew 11, and then he grew another 11. And that's high school. But then in college, he grew 12 in a redshirt year, and then he grew 18 in a redshirt freshman year. And now he's already grown 2. So I, I honestly think because he played in the big man spots in high school, he has more room to grow in the other categories, and the other skills like passing and ball handling, because he didn't develop those as much in high school, right? And obviously that's helped by the positive comments. And I have another example in my other point guard for my other team, Rodney Emmons. Again, he's 6'5". It would be short for a big man, but you see he's a capital PF power forward. So again, I'll go to the height or the high school, and you can see in high school he played most of his minutes at power forward, a little bit at center, some at point guard, obviously. And again, you can see skilled passer with exceptional ball handling or court vision, decent ball handler. But you see his interior defense is much higher than his perimeter defense. You know, so again, I think, and then yeah, again, you look at his growth rate: 19, 18, which is great in high school; 12, 11, but then a 20, and we'll see what he gets to at the end of this season. But again, I think it means his ceiling, or he comes closer to his overall SI ceiling, and because the big man stats skills are developed more, and then we work on improving, develop that the guard skills, right? So now he's already high in the big man stats, and now his guard stats are catching up, right? And then that raises everything. Versus if I kept him as a big man, he would stay as the big man, and the guard skills wouldn't move at all. So
And it's sort of like
not sure.
it's sort of this thought of like, okay, you have a certain SI ceiling with your potential, right? So maybe as an 11 pot, the ceiling is, I don't know, what's been thrown out there on the forums, like 168 or something like that, roughly
For
in
yeah,
that rough range for an 11 pot. But you know, if they played center or power forward the majority of their high school minutes, um, the question then becomes, okay, well maybe you play them at point guard, but they only have so much SI left to grow in college, right? But before they reach their SI ceiling. And so the thought is, well, maybe I play them at point guard, and then as those skills develop, right, it's taking up more categories to reach that SI growth, versus would I have got better growth out of the center related categories had I left him at center, right? So like if you left, if you go back to Cliff Stuckey, for example,
mm-hmm.
if you left Cliff Stuckey as a power forward, right? Because he's 6'7.5", you're probably playing power forward all throughout college. Are you going to have these same SI growth jumps, but in power forward related categories, right?
Right,
And so
right.
maybe that player becomes a dominant rebounder, or grows up in rebounding and interior defense, versus continually growing in basketball IQ, passing, ball handling, and driving, and things like that. And maybe you can get the more or the most out of that player by filling those relevant categories that he played in high school. Or maybe you don't. Maybe in this case, switching to the point guard, you know, a lot of those SI growth towards the ceiling is going to be taken up by those relevant categories because that's where he's playing. You know, so that's
Right.
sort of like the debate there.
Yeah, yeah. So again, you know, just to put some numbers on here, you know, he could be a decent rebounder. He's got a 12. Maybe that his ceiling is like a 16, right? So he's only 4 points away. If I was to play him at power forward, well, he only could grow 4 more points versus his passing. It's a 12 right now, but it, you know, it's like a 9 or 8 when he first came in. You know, maybe that's if that ceiling is also 16, well, that's 8 points that he can grow, or 7 or whatever, you know. So obviously 7, 8 is more than 4. That's That's the type of math we're trying to, the type of growth we're talking about and questioning here. And
Yeah.
we don't know the answer. Again, all of these players or both of these players are current players on our team, so we haven't seen the finished product yet.
Yeah,
And obviously
exactly.
we can't run an alternate universe where we do the other, choice either.
We can only use the case study examples that we have from the actual game. And like we said, we track our players really well, so we use those as examples. But if you guys have something to add to it, some players that are relevant to the discussion, definitely share them with us too. Um,
You want to take a look at one of your players?
yeah, so go ahead and go to McGrath. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I've done with another team, Texas A&M Kingsville, the Javelinas, again, one of the worst programs to take over. Um, I wanted to build an all 7 foot lineup. I wanted to see if I could legitimately have like 7 foot or taller at every position in the lineup and how that would play out. Maybe I slow down the pace a ton. We're super strong defensively or something, and we're just all 7 feet tall. And what happens, right? Sort of a thematic team. So I started recruiting players that are all 7 footers with hopefully some decent comments. Here, Matthew McGrath could be an above average shooter, smart player, will always be a poor defender. That's not great. Can be a skilled passer and a decent ball handler. It's kind of tough to find 7 footers that can be skilled passers and decent ball handlers. So when you find one, that's where you have to play him. Um, so he's gotten up to 13 in IQ, 11 in passing, 9 in ball handling, right? Um, and so the thought sort of here is, okay, he's a 7 footer with a 7'4" wingspan. I'm playing him at point guard. He took like 2 seasons to develop that position, right, as a point guard.
I see that. Right.
Yeah, so yeah, you can see it right there, that immediate boost like that. And so is his SI growth going to be slowed down because I'm playing him out of his normal position? Is it going to be sped up because he's gaining categories that are different from what he was growing in high school? Sort of how's that going to play out? Um, and it's been mixed results. This team, McGrath's perimeter defense is only 6, and he literally has a comment saying we'll never be a good perimeter defender. But again, his height is 7 feet, and he has a 7'4" wingspan, and he's 11 speed with 13 stamina. So he can sort of keep up with good point guards. Kingsville just had a game the other day against a D1 opponent, and their point guard was like a 183 SI. And so I was like, okay, he's going to get roasted. And he didn't. He actually held his own. He kind of sort of shut down that point guard. And maybe his
Right.
length, yeah, maybe his length is coming into play there, you know?
Yeah,
Uh,
you can see his OFG right now.
yeah. Yeah. Look, as a point guard, a 7 foot point guard playing out of position, his opponent field goal percentage is low, right? And he has the
Yeah.
will never be a good perimeter defender, will always be a poor defender comment overall. And so, that's just another
Let me
factor to
check
think
that.
about.
Let's look
Yeah,
at that
his game
game
log.
against
Yeah.
Pacific.
Yep. 5 for 15. Yeah. And so, like I said,
Yeah.
that guy was a 183 SI. And so that's a pretty good defensive game from him. This is also a player that last season in conference averaged like 6.8 assists per game. Right. And so,
Right. Right.
yeah, so it's just interesting to think about overall in terms of how these players will adapt to new positions.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Um, so we just don't know, but I think it's interesting to think about and consider. And this gets into like player builds, which we'll get into probably another time, but we can talk a little bit about it here. You want your players' skills, the highest rated the highest rated skills. You want the points to be in those important skills. Again, point guards, you want them to be good passers, good ball handlers, perimeter defenders, smart. Maybe shooting, maybe 3-point shooting. Right, big men, you want rebounding, interior defense, strength. So you know, and then you get into the comments though. You got about the recruiting evaluations. You got to make sure those match up. So there's a lot of things to consider when talking about the player builds. But now we're bringing in position. Does that matter?
Right. Yeah. I mean, today's day and age in the NBA, a lot of people talk about positionless basketball. right? Sort of started by the Golden State Warriors, and having Kevin Durant on that team, and it's sort of positionless basketball and stuff. Of course, this is an online college basketball simulator, so it's going to be a little bit different, but the whole Kingsville lineup was meant to test that kind of idea and see, if you can take all centers, put them at different positions as long as they have the relevant SI for those categories needed at that position, and see what happens. And I'd say it's been met with like fairly positive success. They finished fourth in conference last year for a team that started off completely like trash. And they have a really tough non-con this year, and they've had some mixed results. I think they're 3-4, but they've been playing like a number of D1 and D2 schools as a D3 school. So this second year will be a case study for how that goes. And they're graduating a couple guys this year, so there'll probably be some fall off next year. But it'll be like a decent conversation, a decent thing to track and see sort of what's going on with that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So yeah, that about wraps it up, I think, for this conversation, today's episode at least, right?
Yeah, and I think we ended up going a little bit longer than we wanted to, but that's
That
sort of what we
happens.
do. We love
Yeah,
hardwood.
we love it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll definitely get more into, all of these things overall, and we'll talk about more things, different things in the future. But what do we have on tap coming up?
Yeah, so this weekend we're going to look to do another episode of the podcast. It'll be a little bit more similar to episode 1 that we did, where we sort of do like, hey, these are a recap of the week for D1 kind of thing, D2, D3, a look ahead, sort of what happened in recruiting, some teams to highlight that had maybe good weeks, bad weeks. And then we'll experiment with some more segments. We got some positive comments when we did the calling out, the tanking teams. And so we'll just test some different segments and see what goes on with that.
Yeah, yeah. So I hope you all looking forward to it. We certainly are. We're having a lot of fun doing this, I'd say.
We got more interest on the first episode than we would have dreamed we would have gotten. Like 130 something views last time we checked, in like 14 different subscribers. And so we were like really stoked to see that, because we started this for fun, and like people love it, And we love
Yeah.
to see your guys' comments in the Discord. That's really cool. And we'll do our best to respond to all of you.
Yeah, and so, let's just keep that momentum going. We're doing our best, certainly, by putting down this episode and, one this weekend too.
All right. This is TPI, the Total Podcast. It's signing off.
Signing off.
We'll see you guys this weekend.